That is why it is wise, I should think, to hold fast to dreams. For if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly.
The poem Dreams by Langston Hughes seems to perfectly embody the Harlem Renaissance and what it stands for. The movement was entirely made possible by one dream shared by thousands of people across America, a dream for equality between races throughout our nation. The Harlem Renaissance was a cultural, social, and artistic explosion that ignited a new black cultural identity and a rebirth of African American arts. It brought people of all races and backgrounds together through music, art, writing, and love. This era sparked a prolonged encounter and exchange between African Americans and whites in America. As the two ethnic groups came in close contact with each other, they were forced to experience each other's customs and traditions. White people, for the first time, encountered African American music, art, and writing. Not only were these exchanged between races during the Harlem Renaissance, but between various African American artists as well. All in all, the Harlem Renaissance was a time period that will forever be remembered by the beautiful and meaningful works of art composed during it, and also by the unbreakable bonds established between races through encounter and exchange of culture and ideas. In the early 1900s, an intense desire to escape the harsh segregationist laws and economic oppressions of the South pushed over 1 million African Americans to move north in search of a better life. With soldiers away at war, the gaps in the workforce left behind further attracted African Americans to join in the Great Migration. Additionally, whites fled Harlem as a result of the Great Migration. This provided the perfect opportunity for African Americans to take over previously white-dominated neighborhoods. At the opening of the 1920s, all across America, there was a desire among African Americans to stop being and seeming like the old-style Negro and to start breaking stereotypes. A very influential and famous book by a noted African American intellectual, Alain Locke, was called The New Negro. Alain and his book inspired African Americans across the country to find themselves through music, art, and writing. The new Negroes could be described as confident, self-aware, sophisticated, and in tune with their artistic talents, among other things. He wanted all people to be treated equally and to know that a person is not defined by the color of their skin, but by who they are as a person. From this new Negro mentality arose talented intellectuals who would become the faces of the Harlem Renaissance and change the perception of African Americans in history. New York had always been the cultural, musical, publishing, and entertainment capital of the country, and black arts could not be published and produced at a professional level in any other place other than New York. Musicians like Duke Ellington, Chick Webb, and Cab Calloway embraced music as their artistic outlet. They used their talents to entertain, relate to, and inspire countless African Americans. Their songs and performances touched not only blacks but whites as well, as they encountered a culture they had never been exposed to thus far. Artists including Aaron Douglas, Laura Wheeler, and Selma Burke produced works strongly shaped by African images, motifs, and modernist themes. Their artwork portrays blacks as sensitive, dignified individuals rather than comic stereotypes. African style and visual devices were included to spread African pride, not only in Harlem but worldwide. Artists became incredibly well known and successful when writers such as W.E.B. Du Bois and James Weldon Johnson chose artwork to represent their literary works. Writers such as Zora Neale Hurston, James Weldon Johnson, Jessie Fawcett, and Langston Hughes used their words to depict the time period. In works filled with emotion and struggle, these writers, along with many others, poured their soul onto paper. Their writing was relatable and powerful, affecting thousands of people both emotionally and mentally. The poems, editorials, books, articles, and essays composed during this time truly epitomize the thoughts and feelings of African American society.
Popular culture, of music, of dance, of just self-presentation, of fashion, that all these things are signs of resistance to oppression. So
These artists frequently exchanged pieces of culture and experiences from their own design. Their roots tied them all together as they related and searched for inspiration from past oppressive times of hardship and struggle. The emotional and physical pain they all encountered reflected in their works of true art. African American artists also partnered with publications to spread their talents in the community. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the nation's oldest and most widely recognized grassroots-based civil rights organization, produced the Crisis magazine. It immensely influenced what the Harlem Renaissance stood for. Founded in 1910 by W.E.B. Du Bois, the crisis recorded current events, opinions of social and political African American leaders, and showcased literal development. The magazine became a voice of the Harlem Renaissance, as Du Bois published works by Langston Hughes, Countee Cullen, and other African American literary figures. By 1918, it already had over 100,000 readers. The crisis, along with other outlets, caught the nation's attention, and for the first time whites encountered black culture. Living in such close proximity, they could experience African American customs, and then could begin to understand that blacks were ordinary people with ordinary families living ordinary lives. In the past, whites had always had a certain tolerance of the black population and their customs, but after experiencing them firsthand, some whites began to celebrate their differences. When publications and galleries became dedicated to artists and writers, clubs and bars became places where musicians could express themselves to a larger audience. The Cotton Club, an esteemed jazz club, was a place where white people could be exposed to the musical phenomenon that was the jazz era.
Patrons of African American arts, also referred to as Negrotarians, were wealthy, connected whites who were passionate in what these artists were producing. Their interest and support presented the opportunity for African Americans to share their remarkable talents with the rest of society.
As a result of talented African Americans gaining more recognition, the financial and economic status of Harlem thrived. Soon, a large majority of African Americans could own things they never dreamed of having before. Real estate, private and corporate businesses, and many more aspects of society were greatly affected by the successes of these up-and-coming artists. A larger middle class developed, creating the perfect opportunity for the black population to intermix with the white population, giving way to an effortless exchange of culture and ideas. All in all, the Harlem Renaissance posed the perfect opportunity for whites to explore black culture. Partially thanks to the Negrotarians, more and more white people were able to experience African American art, music, and writing, and come to appreciate its beauty and relevance. The Harlem Renaissance was a time of relative peace and understanding between races, where culture and ideas were openly exchanged and graciously accepted. Unfortunately, a majority of the white population still clung to their racist morals, contrary to what the black population had to offer in talent and culture. Many in general believed a black renaissance wasn't even possible. They limited their association to African Americans, regarding blacks as cheap sources of labor, second class, illiterate, or an economic threat. It took a good deal of time and talent exposure for whites to truly appreciate the Harlem Renaissance and what it had to offer. The infamous stock market crash of 1929 and the economic downfall that followed put an end to the Jazz Age and prosperity for almost all Americans. With the Great Depression upon our country, there was neither the money nor the time available to continue participating in the joys of the Renaissance. All at once, the heart of the Harlem Renaissance seemed to be lost, and the people nowhere to be found. The excitement of the 20s died down as everyone began to focus on financials and survival. The sudden end of the Harlem Renaissance may have caused it to not live out its full potential. However, today we recognize the immense impact it had on our country's cultural aesthetic and history. It completely transformed the image of African American society and highlighted the remarkable capabilities and talents they have to offer. Influential writers, artists, philosophers, and musicians established careers that produced classic and timeless American cultural works. After great successes in gaining the respect and pride African Americans were looking for, Harlem proved worthy of being the cultural and political capital of Black America. Today, the impact of the Harlem Renaissance can be seen in communities worldwide. The movement directly increased Black militancy, setting the foundation for what would evolve into the 1960s Civil Rights Movement, producing a generation of activists who would fight for what they believed in. Race relations and African American rights improved immensely. Although discrimination is still present in today's society, the Harlem Renaissance is responsible for the African American population being recognized for what they are truly worth and allowing them to gain the respect they deserve. The Harlem Renaissance ignited a new Black cultural identity and a rebirth of African American arts. White people encountered Black culture for the first time and were able to explore it in depth, along with exchanging ideas and customs. This unforgettable era shaped our country into what it is today, a place where every man and woman is considered equal, regardless of the color of their skin.